When the transfer portal opens on Friday, Washington needs to go after some big-time stars.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code to Lockdown College for $20 off your first purchase. And just quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well. So as we post new show, plus if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there. I got to spend a couple minutes at the very end talking about some more injury woes for Washington men's basketball. Real tough. We'll get to that in a little while, because I want to spend some time also talking about how many transfers Washington is going to be able to take in this 2026 cycle. I'm going to talk about some of the running backs that I think that you need to keep an eye on, or that I will certainly be keeping an eye on for one reason or other. But I want to talk about something that I kind of alluded to yesterday, as all you everydayers know, because when you look at Washington's roster with what Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff have right now, going into the 2026 season, there is a lot to be excited about. But there is no such thing in the world of college football as too much talent. And when you go and you look at the transfer portal right now, there are certainly a couple of positions that Washington needs to go out and target, whether it be defensive line, whether it be wide receiver, running back. If you think that there's somebody who the Huskies are somebody who needs an offensive lineman, there's another one. Cornerback, certainly a big need. And like I said, again, on yesterday's show, you have talent, especially young talent, that may still have a year or even 2 years of eligibility remaining before they're even eligible for the NFL draft. That's all great. That's awesome. That's exactly what you're looking for. But again, it's about supplementing what you already have. That's what the transfer portal is for. That's how Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff view free agency. It's not creating a whole new roster. It's not building stuff back up from scratch. It's not you need to go out and find 8, 9, 10 starters, whatever it is. No. When you look at this transfer portal cycle in particular for Washington, I would say, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, maybe you need somewhere between 7 and 10 guys, depending on some other needs, specialists. Again, we'll get there in a little bit. But all of that is to say, you need to go out, if you're Jedd Fisch and Matt Doherty, Ryan Walters, whoever else is making some of these decisions, you need to go out and spend some big time capital to go get some big time talent. Because again, it's not even just supplementing is what is going to take you a long way in the world of college football. When we look around at some of these teams that are in the college football playoff right now and what it takes to build an Ohio State, a Texas Tech caliber roster. Again, I'm not saying that's necessarily what Washington is going to be able to do through the transfer portal cycle just this year. But when you just look at what this team is right now and what it needs, there are so many players out there that can just help Jedd Fisch and this roster continue to level up. And I think a lot of that does start along the defensive line, where one guy I haven't mentioned yet, who I think is certainly well worth having a conversation about, is Louisville edge rusher AJ Green. He's somebody who this coaching staff got a chance to take a look at in the Sun Bowl during Jedd Fisch's first season. He played a little bit in that game, racked up 3 tackles, and is just one of these big, physical, explosive edge rushers that's a really nice athlete at 6'6", 250 pounds, that had a really nice breakout season. He had 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks this past year. And as you look at just this defensive line class as a whole, right now, outside of a couple of guys, as more names are still starting to enter, and a couple of them, it seems like there are already destinations in mind in one case or another. With a guy like AJ Green, you absolutely do need to go get a big time starting caliber edge rusher. And this is the kind of prospect that I would be looking at in that regard. And if you're Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff, this is one of those times where you need to take a big swing and just say, all right, we have everything that you could want. And I feel like this applies to guys on the interior as well. Mateen Ibarogba, somebody who I've talked about a little bit on a previous show as an interior defensive line guy to know. I look at all of them and just look at what Washington brings to the table again, and there is so much to like here. Because if you're a defensive lineman that is in the transfer portal and is getting big time offers from all over the place, there is no reason that Washington shouldn't be in the mix for each and every single one of them. Let me tell you why. Because when you look at what Washington needs right now, it is just so much defensive line help. It's so much pass rush help. He had 24 sacks this past season. That's good to be tied for 11th in the Big Ten. But that's not enough. You need so much more from that group, especially as Ryan Walters expects his defense to take a big jump in year 2. You need to continue to see more and more push. Now that we know Ontario Thompson looks like he's not coming back. He got a NFL All-Star draft bowl invite, one of those sorts of things. So he's going to be off the draft. Then you look at Bryce Butler in the transfer portal, Samode Pepa, Logan Sagapolu, graduated. Taitai Uyunglele, graduated. You are losing so much at that position along the interior. And then on the edge, too, you look at Deshaun Lynch, graduated. And Zach Durfee doesn't look like he's going to be coming back either at this point in time. There's so much that you can go out and do to upgrade in terms of look at how many snaps we have available. If you want to go and shine in the Big Ten for a year, maybe 2 years, depending on, who you are and what your eligibility looks like, we have all of the opportunity for you to do that. Certainly get all the exposure that you're looking for in terms of the NFL draft, everything you might need in terms of NIL. And Washington has a really solid coaching staff in that same regard, especially when you think about who is at the top of all that on the defensive side of the ball in Ryan Walters. And I'm laying all these things out for you because this is what Washington really needs to be going and selling, not just on the defensive side of the ball, but on the offensive side of it as well. I'll talk about running backs a little bit more in a couple of minutes here, because I think that position right now is worth a deep dive with just all of the big time names that have entered over the last couple of weeks and what the Huskies might need. But I look at wide receiver. Nick Marsh is a name I've mentioned again and again on the show, because that is the caliber of guy that would not only fit this bill of a big swing that you need to go out there and take, but as somebody who would level up Washington's roster. And yeah, it's great that you went out, you signed 3 4-star wide receivers in the 2026 class. It's great that you still have some big time playmakers coming back to school, whether it be Desmond Roebuck, a freshman All-American, Rashid Williams. We'll see what he's going to be able to bring after missing most of the season with an injury. Chris Lawson, a former 4-star recruit who really did look good, especially down the stretch of the 2025 season. There's so much to like at that position, but again, it's about continuing to move forward and continuing to level up. And if you have an opportunity to go out and sell a guy like that at any position, at cornerback as well. I know I'm jumping all over the place in terms of positions, but it all comes back to the same thing at the end of the day. And it all is done with the same goal of improving the roster and moving forward. Again, I know I've mentioned this a lot, but when Jedd Fisch talked about the goal for the 2026 season should be making the college football playoff at his LA Bowl postgame press conference, that these are all things that you can do to reach that goal. And I think that's all very, very achievable when you look at what is on the roster, what's coming back, and where in terms of some of this talent with young guys all over the place, whether it be Damon Williams, John Mills, Dylan Robinson, Zedris Renesale, again, whoever you want to mention in that regard, but pairing them with more experienced bodies, especially at these positions of need out of the transfer portal, is great, because there's no way you look at the defensive line right now that is the group that you want it to be at the start of the year, because it's just so inexperienced. There's certainly some high-end talent there. I love what Linus Davis gave you during the 2025 season, but he's not going to be able to do that alone. You need to go out and add 2 or 3 bodies in that regard. You need to go out and do the same thing at edge rusher after you saw injuries really just hamper that room over the course of the season. And yeah, again, I know I talked about this yesterday too. You like the freshman there as well, just like you might at wide receiver. But that shouldn't preclude you from going out and saying, okay, we think that Derek Coleman-Brusa can play in every game this year and certainly give us some juice as a pass rusher, but that shouldn't stop you from adding an AJ Green or adding just any of these other high-end players that you might really like at that position. Because if you were able to help this roster take another big step forward in 2026 with what you were able to show this past season, with the way the schedule lines up for you, there is so much to like about what Washington can be this coming fall. And I think that now it really is just on Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff to go out there and sell it and make it work. Because again, not only is there so much to like, but Washington has everything that they might need to go out there and sell anybody they really like on coming to Seattle. And I think all of that can really be described with what's going on at running back. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like college football season, tailgates, packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, and prices jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. The app is incredibly easy to use. I went from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. I love being able to see the view from my seat before buying, so I know exactly what I'm getting. The zone deal stood out. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. As we march on here, I want to talk about something real quick as we just kind of dive into the running back room. Because as I look at where Washington's running backs sit right now, I do like this group a lot. I think it certainly could benefit from somebody like an Adam Muhammad, obviously, right? Who can just come in, give you 140 to 160 carries, maybe somewhere in that ballpark to ease the load on a lot of the room. At the same time, I've seen a lot of people who are extremely upset about Adam Muhammad entering the transfer portal, and rightfully so. He's somebody who I always loved interacting with him during his time at Washington. He was a really nice kid who I certainly wish nothing but the best for in his future. I look at this position, and with people being very frustrated again about a running back entering the transfer portal, that's where I'm not necessarily overly concerned. I think Adam is extremely talented, and I was so impressed, as I've said on a lot of episodes here on Locked On Huskies, with what he did over the back month or so of the season, especially once Jonah Coleman went down. It was very clear he was coming into his own, and he's someone who is going to be a very good, very, very productive back. But I also look at this, and I think to myself, man, Washington's top loss in the transfer portal so far has been a running back. That's not something I'm really worried about. And I've seen a lot of people asking if Denzel Boston and the NIL funds that have freed up with him could lead to Adam returning to Washington. I highly doubt that from what I've heard and everything that I've been told about what has just gone on in terms of how Washington is going to be looking at running backs in the portal and everything else along those lines. So that's not something I would certainly get your hopes up for. But again, the fact that right now the worst loss that Washington has suffered in the portal has been a running back is something that I'm not necessarily overly concerned about. And it's because of some of these guys that I'm going to talk to you about. This is just a smidge of what is in the portal at that position right now. And again, none of this is to say that Adam Muhammad is not an extremely talented running back, because he absolutely is. He's going to get a lot of interest from Big Ten and SEC programs, and wherever he winds up, he is certainly going to be someone who's going to produce. But I feel like all of these guys can absolutely do that too. And the first one that I want to talk about in that regard is Hollywood Smothers from NC State. This is a guy that I've been really, really impressed with. 939 yards, 6 touchdowns this past season for the Wolfpack on 160 carries. And I want to make sure that I note just the touches that some of these guys have gotten over the course of the year, because I think that's really important in this regard, because every time we talk about running backs, I know I spent a lot of time talking about the future of the room and what it's going to look like in 2026, because you have to set aside a certain amount of carries for Damon Williams, right? Jordan Washington is a guy who I certainly expect to take a big step forward in 2026. Brian Bonner is someone who looks like he's going to be able to contribute right away, given just kind of what he's been able to do over the course of his high school career and how this coaching staff views what he brings to the table. And then whoever else in the room that you think might be able to step up and give you some production in 2026, whether you like Quade Carr or Julian McMahon or Ansu Sonoe, whoever that might be. I think that if you're able to add a guy like Hollywood Smothers, who's 5'11", 195, who can come in, give you a little bit for 1 year, maybe 2 in some of these cases with guys that have some other eligibility remaining, that is exactly what you're looking for. And I think with a guy like Hollywood, one of the most important things in this regard is he is a senior. He has been able to play in all 3 years at NC State, he's got eligibility remaining. He redshirted in 2023, but in terms of classes, in terms of being in a college program, it will be his 4th season. And this is one of those guys who, again, I just listed off the production. He's certainly just more than enough than you would need in that regard to help out everything else in the room. But with somebody who has that much college football under his belt, I think one of the biggest things that you're looking for and that Scotty Graham is going to be looking for in that regard is somebody who can protect Damon Williams. And that's where you want to go after some of these upper class guys who I remember talking to Jonah Coleman about this back in spring practice. And he talked to us about how one of the things that he was really looking to do over the course of the offseason ahead of his senior year was continuing to master the playbook and being able to communicate it and teach it to younger guys. And he told us, yeah, I know the playbook off the back of my hand at this point. I could teach it to you guys. And it all at the end of the day comes back to pass protection and understanding of the offense, because when those things are working really well, everything else in terms of just what's going on for the quarterback or anybody else on a given play will certainly look a lot easier if you don't have to worry about a free rusher or a blitzer or whatever, because you know that your running back is going to be in the right place to pick some of those things up. And that was one of the things that was always so valuable about Jonah Coleman. And I think that's something where Hollywood Smothers, who again is just someone who will be in his fourth year of college football, will be able to give you a little bit more in that regard. And somebody who would be heading into his third season, who I was really impressed by throughout this year, and certainly reminds me of Jonah Coleman in a lot of ways because he's listed at 5'8" and 207 pounds, is Turbo Richard from Boston College. I know, just some absolutely elite names on today's show. He's a guy who had 749 yards and 9 carries for Boston College this past season on 145 carries. I look at what he brings to the table, and it's a lot of the same thing. He's got that home run hitting potential. He's certainly a lot faster than he looks at that size, being just all muscled up at 5'8" and close to 210 pounds. But he's just another one of these guys who you can certainly rely on to just take a little bit of an extended workload away from all of these other guys in the room, because there's just not a lot of experience at the running back position right now. And yes, Jordan Washington did play a lot this season, but as I referenced a couple weeks ago, as you dares know, he had less than 30 touches this season. And with what you're losing between Adam Muhammad and Jonah Coleman, you have to replace more than 310 total touches between rushes and catches from just this past season alone. And that's something where a guy like Hollywood Smothers or a guy like Turbo Richard can give you a whole lot more in that regard, because like I said, 160 carries for Hollywood this past season, 145 for Turbo Richard. And that's exactly what you're looking for. And it's great that now that I really look at it, all of these guys would have multiple years of eligibility remaining. That's awesome. But I think a lot of these guys might be just in terms of what running back is, where you look at just lifespan in the NFL and everything like that. If you're able to turn pro and not have to use up all of your eligibility, that's great. Go for it. Might as well. And I think that would certainly be the case with one of, if not both of those guys. And someone else, so I'm really, really interested in, I might consider him my top running back target, is Texas's CJ Baxter. We've seen a whole lot of guys leave Texas at running back, and CJ Baxter is a guy who he looked really, really good as a true freshman in 2023. I'm sure a lot of you out there remember that because he looked awesome in the Sugar Bowl against the Huskies. And this is one of those guys where he suffered an injury and barely played in 2024. He's got 855 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground to his name throughout his 3-year career. This is a guy who's a former 5-star recruit coming out of Florida, and he's somebody who I look at as maybe my top target right now, because this is one of those things where it just seems like he got passed over at Texas this year. And yes, they had a lot of really talented backs in the room, but as he was coming off the injury, I think it's one of those things where maybe he just kind of became that forgotten man in the room, and you're going to be able to take advantage of that because, like I said, this is a former 5-star talent who also just has the size and the physicality that you're looking for to run between the tackles at 6'1" and 216 pounds. And with it being his 4th year of college football, he's another one of those guys who would presumably be able to come in quickly, pick up the offense, and give you something in the pass protection regard, especially at that size. And I think all of those things are so, so important. And one of the reasons that I would prioritize CJ Baxter over some of these other guys is I think it's all about continuing to expand that recruiting footprint, because it's something that obviously you tried and failed in terms of Jonte Cook being another former 5-star from Texas. Obviously, CJ Baxter is from Florida by way of Austin, Texas now. But this is one of those guys where if you are able to get that kind of talent on your roster moving forward, and even if he is just a one and done guy for you, that's fine. If he's able to give you enough and give you something to contribute while not taking too much away from the other backs in the room, with that much disparity right now in terms of how many touches you need to make up for in that running back room, he is just somebody who has all of the talent in the world to go out and help you just bridge the gap to Brian Bonner potentially taking over as the bell cow guy, or Jordan Washington, or again, whoever else that might be. And with all of the talent out there at running back, you might as well go take a big swing on a guy from Florida, because if you're able to just continue building these pipelines all over the country and continuing to establish Washington's larger recruiting footprint, and that you're able to go and get these big time names out of Texas, like you just did with Jordan Clay. Again, obviously, high schooler from Orlando, Florida, before committing to the Longhorns and everything like that. But it still matters at the end of the day when you're able to continue expanding that recruiting footprint to every corner of the country. And this is just kind of where we've seen Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff try to gain a bigger foothold, is in the Southeast and in Florida. And if you're able to get a really nice productive year out of a guy like CJ Baxter, I think that that's something that would be something that this coaching staff should absolutely explore in that regard. And that kind of brings us to our final question of the day, in terms of transfers at least, is how many transfers are the Huskies going to take? And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Just open the FanDuel app during Happy Hour and it'll always bring you something new. From boosts, bonuses, surprises, and so much more. The timing is perfect right before the games and right before the weekend starts. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour. Every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. It's really interesting scenario to look at where Washington is sitting right now in terms of roster construction, where our good buddy Christian Capel over at On Montlake released his own portal tracker today and has the Huskies sitting at 83 scholarships right now. And I still wouldn't be surprised if, I know it's something I talked about on a previous episode, as you ever dares know, if we see a couple more guys decide to enter the portal, my number right now would be somewhere around 5, which is perfect, because I think that Washington is going to wind up bringing in somewhere between 7 and 10 players from the transfer portal. And I think the majority of those, probably 4 or 5, are going to be along the defensive line. And then you can sparse out the rest of them however you might be. I've seen a lot with New Mexico tight end Dorian Thomas in recent days. That's the guy who I'm certainly very interested in. I'm curious to see how Washington's tight end position shapes up, especially after you bring in 2 guys from the high school ranks in Sam Billadol and Kakua Amua. But that's one of those guys who, especially because he committed to Jedd Fisch and Jordan Paopao at Arizona out of high school, if that's one of those guys who does want to come back to Seattle with him being a local guy from Kent, maybe you find a way to make that work. Again, wide receiver. I've talked about this a lot. I mentioned earlier in the show, getting a big-time X-receiver like a Nick Marsh or like an Ormarian Miller would be a really nice upgrade. But if you don't end up going that route because you just feel more confident in the players in the room, it's one of those things where it remains to be seen. But again, I think at the end of the day, we're going to see somewhere between 7 and 10 players come onto this roster, because it's one of those things where I'm curious to see what this is going to look like in terms of Jedd Fisch's strategy for taking those next steps, because you have so many really nice young bodies in this 2026 class that you want to make sure you get on the field. Who's to say some members of the 2025 class don't take steps forward as redshirt freshmen or true sophomores? Champ Tilialia is probably the most obvious example in that department of someone who seems very ready to move into a starting role, even with Kieran Hatchett coming back for a 7th season of eligibility. Like, that's one of the names I'm keeping an eye on in that department. I talked about this with edge rusher a week or 2 ago with the 2 redshirt freshmen that you have at the position in Victor Sanchez Hernandez and Caleb Smith. Both those guys are certainly very talented and have all the traits necessary to succeed. But what is that going to look like when we get out to spring practice in March, in April, whenever that might be? And why would you not just go out and continue to upgrade that position? Cornerback is another one in that same department where you certainly want to go out and get somebody who is a quality starter and very capable of filling just that need in the Big Ten. And if Rajon Duncan or Jaron Jones or Elijah Durr or, Elias Johnson, whoever else it might be, takes that next step or comes in from the high school ranks and shows that they are ready to compete, great. That's awesome. You're more than happy with that, however that might turn out. But you still need to go out and make some big time acquisitions in this transfer portal cycle. And again, I think that number is between 7 and 10. And the one just position that I know we haven't talked a lot about that certainly might be worth going out and exploring a scholarship upgrade in that regard is at punter with Luke Dunn, where you look at it right now. I'm very curious to see what Washington is going to want to do in that department over these next couple of weeks, because it was very clear that they were high on him. They liked that Aussie style of punting when you go out and you prioritize Dusty Zimmer, who obviously just decides to head back to Australia after a very, very brief stint here in the United States. And Luke Dunn is somebody who this coaching staff seemed to have some high hopes for, but in terms of the net, the averages, all that sort of stuff, it just wasn't there this year. And I'm curious to see if they want to let that play out in 2026 or go out and continue to find further upgrades. And again, at the end of the day, all of that math will come back to somewhere between 7 and 10 total just incoming prospects, in my opinion. So we'll see how that might change over the next couple of weeks if there are some surprises in terms of who decides to enter their name in the portal. Anything can happen in this world of college football at this point in time. But as I look at where Washington stands, that's the number that I'm just going to kind of be basing everything around as I do my tracking and I just see who enters and who might be reported as coming out of visits, what I might be hearing, different things like that over the next couple of weeks. And it's certainly going to be a lot of fun. And that's why one of many, many reasons you should be subscribed to Locked On Huskies here on YouTube, wherever else you get your podcasts. But before we get out of here today, one more thing I want to mention. It's really unfortunate to see Wesley Yates. I talked about this on the Monday show. It seems like he's going to be out a while, according to the Field of 68's Jeff Goodman, who spoke with Danny Sprinkle that he underwent wrist surgery, and is going to be out indefinitely. And this is a really, really big blow for Washington. Obviously, one of the prize transfers that you're able to get back from USC, averaging 14.9 points per game this season. He wasn't necessarily shooting the same way that he was at USC in terms of behind the 3-point line, where he was at 43.9% last year, was down to 33.8 so far through the first 11 games of the year. But this was someone who, in this really unfortunate injury-plagued season, had been your most consistent piece. And I say that because Hannes Steinbach had missed 3 games with an ankle. Pretty much everybody else in some way, shape, or form had missed time or had not been in the starting lineup. Wesley Yates was the one guy who had started every single game that he had played in. And that's just one of those things, or just every single game that the Huskies had played up until the San Diego game, But I look at what's next with Big Ten play looming. Again, I talked about this yesterday, but it's certainly worth repeating that there are 3 guys right now who really need to step up and shoulder the load in terms of being that secondary scorer, where we know what Hannes Steinbach is giving you on a night in, night out basis, but it's Desmond Claude, it's Zoom Diallo, and it's Quimari Peterson. I think Quimari is the guy that I would single out from that group, because as Desmond has started to get healthier, we've seen him become a lot more confident going downhill, driving, all those different things, which is great. That's exactly what you'd hope for as non-conference play starts to wind down and we start to get into the real meat of the schedule with this trip to Indiana and Purdue looming next week. And as he starts to, I don't want to say regain that physicality, but just get more comfortable doing all the things that have made him such a successful college basketball player, I feel like we're going to see his role continue to expand. I've been so impressed with Zoom Diallo throughout the course of the year, whatever the role has been, whether it be starting, coming off the bench. Obviously, I think we're going to see him a lot more on the starting lineup now, but having just that guy who has done such a great job at working on his shooting from behind the 3-point line, obviously hasn't taken a ton of those, but it certainly has made him a much more complete player. And then he's always been good with that mid-range shot. He's so good at just driving, getting downhill, going to the basket, absorbing contact, all those sorts of things. And it's very clear that he has just taken that next step in his progression in that regard as an off-ball guard, especially. And he's someone who Danny will still rely on to run the offense and all those sorts of things at different points in time. But having him be a much more versatile player in that regard has certainly made this offense operate more effectively. And with Quimari Peterson, I know I said that he was the one I wanted to single out. It's because we just haven't necessarily seen what he was totally billed as in terms of a scorer just yet so far this season, because he's had to do so many other things. He was coming off a hamstring injury, which certainly seemed to limit his conditioning through the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season at the very least, I'd say. And I talked about it yesterday. It's the struggles from 3-point range for him. But now that Wesley is going to be out for however long it might be, he's the guy who you really want to see step up and get going, because you still have so many talented scoring options in the backcourt. And if you combine that with, now you got a healthy Bryson Tucker, Hannes Steinbach, again, with whatever Frank Kepnang is able to give you, Nikola Zapina, with Jacob Ognisevich coming back pretty soon, you still have plenty of other guys who can score it in bunches if needed, or just play their roles depending on just kind of how you view what Frank Kepnang can give you on his best day on the offensive side of the ball. There's so much that this team has still just not been able to achieve, in my opinion, because of all these injuries. But as we just look at these next couple of weeks and how tough the opponents are going to be, this is going to be one of those scenarios where even if Washington isn't able to come out with, let's just say, an above 500 record, because that's going to be very, very tough over the next 5 games. Since I'm recording this ahead of Washington's Monday night matchup with Utah, I really do think that this team can still get back on the right track, even with injuries like this. But it's going to take a guy like Quimari Peterson stepping up and showing what it took for him to win Conference Player of the Year in the Southern Conference last season. And it's also going to take somebody who I also highlighted for a minute on yesterday's show in Jasir Rencher to continue just giving you everything he can on defense. And then also being a guy who Danny has talked about being a really solid 3-point shooter, just taking that next step on the offensive side of the ball and becoming a guy who can play his role, whether that be 10, 15, 20 minutes a night, whatever it might be, and just give you something on the offensive end. I really do feel like this team has everything it needs to figure it out. And we're going to keep a very close eye on that over the next couple of weeks. But until then, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And if you like what we have here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there, we're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to click that like button, click that little bell so you notice when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.